Hey guys, so after last week's Delsere's fire build, this week I'm going to talk about Delsere's frost build. Now the two variants can be different in playstyle because with frost you can freeze the enemy and chill them to slow them down, while fire there's no way to do that other than to kite them around your slow time. But in general the two variants mechanic is relatively the same. You have to attack the enemy while they're in effect of your slow time. Speaking of mechanic, this build again is based on Triumvirate, which makes your arcane orb do extra damage by casting your signature spell 3 times. It stacks up to 3. Each stack gives you X amount of damage. In my case, my Triumvirate gives you 99% more damage. So at triple stack, I do 297% more damage of arcane orb, and you plus that with the slow time extra damage, it's a lot more. I'm not sure how it's calculated, but I'm pretty sure if you search on the forums you'll find someone to explain it. To a point in higher greater rifts that if you do not cast slow time on the enemy, you pretty much can't kill anything. Even if it's the most basic skeleton, you cannot kill it, so you need to have slow time in everything. Also, I use the ring set called Bastion of Will, which uses focus and restraint. One gives you 50% more damage once you cast your signature spell or generator spell, in this case Magic Missile Glacial Spike, and gives you 50% more if you cast your spender spell, in this case Arcane Orb Frozen Orb. So with these things added together, this is where your main damage output come from. Okay, let's talk about the runes I'm using. I'm using Magic Missile Glacial Spike. Glacial Spike is very good because it freezes the enemy, not just chill. You can freeze an enemy every 5 seconds. So you can even freeze rift bosses, so that can save your ass a lot of time or set up for great positioning. And I'm using Arcane Orb Frozen Orb, that's your main damage dealing. The other option is Energy Twister, and because of Triumvirate, which gives you extra damage to Arcane Orb, that's the reason why I'm using Arcane Orb in this build. And then I'm using Slow Time Exhaustion, because Slow Time is what makes Delsere's Magnum Opus work, so you must have this spell and it is your core spell and you have to cast it every time. Then I'm using Teleport Fracture, because as I play Wizard, I can pretty much not play without teleport, so I'm very used to it. And I'm using I'm using Fracture. The reason is because it creates 2 decoils. The 2 decoils also cast slow time, although they're not as strong as your own slow time and do not give you damage bonus, but they do slow enemies and slow the projectile as well. I'm using Magic Weapon Conduit. The reason why I choose Conduit is because it gives you arcane power based on hit. If you have no arcane power, you do 0 DPS. Your damage is 0, you do 0 DPS. Even if you choose Force Weapon, you have no arcane power, your DPS is at 0. So you need to keep your damage up. Then I'm using Energy Armor, Force Armor, because this will prevent you getting one-shotted a lot of the time. And most Wizards incorporate Energy Armor, Force Armor in this because of that reason. Then the passive I'm using Prodigy. Back to that idea again. If you have no arcane power to cast anything, no matter how much damage you do 0 because you have no power to cast. That's why I chose Prodigy. Then I have Cold-Blooded. Cold-Blooded does extra damage to enemy that is chilled or frozen. In this case, pretty much all enemy that is going to be affected by you, because your main damages are Glacial Spike and Frozen Orb, so that's an extra 10% damage. Then I chose Illusionist. I'm actually thinking about dropping it because of how using Frost you can kite around and escape a lot of times, but I'm still experimenting. Then I'm using Unstable Anomaly. A lot of times you get unlucky pulls, unlucky positioning, or a bad thunderstorm, you will die right away no matter what level you are or how good you are. It's just RNG, because this game is based on RNG. But this spell or this passive will save your ass a lot of time. Lack of a better term, save your ass a lot of times because of those situations. Let's talk about the items I'm using. First and foremost, you must have the 6-piece Delsere's Magnum Opus set, because you need the 6-piece bonus. Without it, this build will not work. Then the Triumvirate Offhand Source, because of the passive bonus, which increases your arcane orb by X amount of %. which is a big damage boost, a mandatory pretty much to this build. Then the Bastion of Will ring set, which is focus and restraint. With it, you can increase your damage by a lot as well. At the moment, I see the 3 weapons you can use for this build. One is the craftable one-hand axe called Utar's Roar. Utar. Anyways, it always gives you frost damage bonus, so it's always helpful for this set build. And because it is craftable, you can easily get an ancient one with good stats. Then you get your Azarath. Azarath gives us a sword that gives you frost bonus damage and has chance to freeze the enemy, which is extra helpful in survivability. Then you have probably the best one, Gesture of Orpheus. It's a one-hand wand that gives you a deduction in slow time cooldown. This is, since slow time is your main spell. And it always gives you a elemental bonus, but to get the one you want might be relatively difficult, not to mention the one you want and the ancient one. That leaves the amulet slot, the belt slot, and the bracer slot. With the bracer slot, if you get the strong arm bracer, every time you freeze or stun an enemy, you do extra damage to them. That is probably the best in slot for this build because you do need that extra output. I'm actually experimenting with the belt and amulet slot since you can fit a 2-piece Blackthorn set in there. With the 2-piece bonus, it gives you extra damage to elites. Although I'm currently using the Witching Hour and a Tarasha amulet, which has no synergy whatsoever, but I'm still experimenting like I said. For the legendary gems, I'm currently using Bane of the Trapped and Zai's Stone of Vengeance. Zai's Stone of Vengeance is pretty much a must-have because of the 20% stun based on damage. Then the last legendary gem, there's many options you could use. For example, you could do the gem of Efficacious Toxin, which gives you bonus damage and damage over time. You could go for Ice Blink and more survivability, and you slow the enemy even more. Then even the Molten Wildebeest gives you more survivability. So there's many options for your last gem. The general playstyle of this set is to have your Triumvirate buff stacked to 3, and then you must have your focus and restraint buff up as well, and then you put your slow time on the enemy or for them to walk in it. That's how you do the damage. They must be within your slow time. Just remember to always keep your Triumvirate buff and focus and restraint buff up, or else you'll lose a lot of DPS and you spam all your power, you don't know what's going on, why you're not doing any damage because you don't have these buff on anymore. Currently with the Delsere's Magnum Opus Frost build I'm using, I got to GRift level 47. And it's very different from the Fire build because Frozen Orb has a shorter travel distance, so you have to get a lot closer to the enemy. And like I mentioned earlier, Frost have more survivability due to all the slow and freeze. It's just that the Frozen Orb does the most damage when it explodes on the target of impact that you want it to explode on. So that actually takes some time for practice. Alright guys, that's my build guide. Hope you guys like it. I'll leave you to the rest of the video. The next video I'll make is probably Tarasha's set. Take care guys.